The first night I stepped inside, I knew something was wrong. The silence wasn't normal silence. It was watching me. I'll never forget the first time I laid eyes on the lighthouse. It wasn't just the isolation, it was the way it seemed to stand there, uninviting, as if daring anyone to get close. The place was built on a jagged cliff with nothing but miles and miles of black ocean below. No land for hundreds of miles, just endless waves crashing below, endlessly rolling in the dark. The sea always seemed so alive, especially here. But at the same time, it felt wrong, as though it was hiding something deep beneath its surface. I couldn't explain it, but I knew it from the first moment I arrived. The lighthouse? It felt like it was waiting for me. I'm sure I should have been more frightened, but I was running away from something far scarier than the isolation. I needed to be alone, far from everything I knew. I needed this job to escape. I needed it to forget. I was the new keeper. Just me, the lighthouse, and the unrelenting sea. Simple enough, right? Well, the other keeper, before me, that is, had warned me. The ship will come every night. Don't go near it, he said, in the most chilling, matter-of-fact way. He didn't explain it, just said, don't board it. Never board it. There was a reason, he said. He didn't need to explain. I wasn't sure if I was meant to believe it, but his eyes, they weren't like the eyes of a man who'd just told a wild story. They were the eyes of someone who'd seen too much, someone who had lived through something that wasn't meant to be explained. And as the sun dipped below the horizon that first night, I felt the weight of those words. I thought about that warning and thought it was just another quirk of the old keeper. He'd probably gone crazy in his last few years, alone in the dark, so far from the world. But as night settled in and the fog rolled in thick, something in the back of my mind started to itch. There was something off about this place, a feeling I couldn't shake. The lighthouse itself was quiet, except for the occasional groan of the wood as it shifted in the wind. The sound of the waves was constant. The sea's rhythm was always there. But somehow, tonight, it felt different, like it was holding its breath, waiting. I shrugged it off. After all, I was alone. There was no one here to worry about, just me, the fog, and that unspoken rule. But I couldn't stop thinking about the ship that would come every night. Was it real? Was it just a ghost story made up by an old man trying to scare me off? It seemed ridiculous, but the more I thought about it, the more it gnawed at me. I turned to the task at hand, checking the light at the top of the lighthouse tower. The beam cut through the fog, illuminating nothing but more fog. But something in the distance, something moved out there. It was a ship, a huge ship, too big for the horizon. I squinted into the murky darkness, my heartbeat picking up. I couldn't make out the details, just the outline, dark against the gray, and the silence. It was so still. Not a single sound came from the ship. The waves didn't crash against it. It moved in eerie silence, as though it wasn't real. I shook my head. Maybe it was just my eyes adjusting to the dark. Maybe it was an illusion. But the ship didn't go away. It just was there. Still, silent, waiting. I stood frozen in place, trying to convince myself that it wasn't as weird as it seemed. Maybe it was a passing cargo ship, but why was it so close? Why didn't it have any lights on? Why wasn't there any sound, not even the low hum of the engines? The old keeper's words echoed in my mind, and I shivered. The ship will come every night. Don't go near it. I remembered his warning clearly now. Maybe it wasn't just a story. He had meant it. I wasn't supposed to approach the ship no matter what. But curiosity clawed at me. I didn't understand what I was seeing. I didn't understand what was happening, but I needed to know. Something in me pushed me forward, a feeling that this was more than just a ship. There was something else here, something that couldn't be explained by ordinary means.
As the ship's shadow grew larger as it came closer to the cliffs, I stepped back from the window, my chest tight. I had to force myself to breathe. I couldn't let this curiosity get the best of me. I had a job to do. The light needed to stay on. The radio needed to be checked. I couldn't afford to be distracted, not by something I didn't understand, not by something I couldn't control. I glanced at the clock. It was nearly time for the scheduled check on the radio. My hands moved mechanically as I went through the motions, trying to keep my mind occupied. I reached for the radio, fiddling with the dials, trying to tune in. But I couldn't focus. My mind kept drifting back to the ship. Every time I thought I could shake it off, I saw its dark outline through the window, looming like a silent sentinel, watching me. I tried to push the thoughts away, focus on the job, keep busy. The routine would ground me. But as I checked the light, adjusting its beam to slice through the fog, I could feel the ship getting closer. It was like it was waiting for me, waiting for something. I couldn't stop the unease from creeping into my thoughts. I moved around the tower, making sure everything was functioning properly, but all I could think about was that ship. It was no longer just a ship. It was something else. It was part of the darkness, part of the mystery surrounding this place, something I wasn't meant to understand. And then, just like that, the hum stopped. The ship was gone. I froze. I stared into the night, blinking in confusion. How could it disappear so quickly? One moment it had been there, looming ominously in the fog. The next, it was gone, as if swallowed by the darkness itself. I felt a wave of relief wash over me, but it was short-lived. A cold chill settled in my bones, and I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't over. That ship wasn't just going to disappear. It would be back. It always came back. And I had a sinking feeling that the more I resisted the pull, the closer it would get, the more it would try to drag me in. I moved back to the window and looked out just to make sure it hadn't come back. But the sea was empty. No ship, just the mist and the sound of the waves. The fog had closed in thicker than before. But I knew it would come again. I didn't know why, I didn't know what it was, but I knew one thing for sure. The ship was real, and it was coming for me.
The hours dragged on after the ship disappeared into the fog, but my mind couldn't let it go. I kept replaying the scene over and over in my head, trying to rationalize it. A ship too close to shore, with no lights, no sound? It didn't make sense, and that unsettled me more than I cared to admit. I had to focus. The lighthouse was my responsibility now. The routine had to be followed, no matter how strange things got. Checking the light, making sure it was still functioning was easy enough. But there was a part of me, deep inside, that kept sneaking glances out the window, hoping to see the ship again. I told myself I was just curious, nothing more. But there was a gnawing feeling in my stomach, like I knew that something was coming. And it wasn't gonna be as simple as a ship passing by. The night was cold, colder than I'd expected, and the fog clung to the windows like a second skin. I shivered, not from the cold, but from something else. I kept trying to tell myself that it was just my nerves, that the isolation was getting to me. But the silence, it felt like it was pressing in on me. I stood by the window for what felt like hours, staring out into the endless fog. I kept my eyes peeled for any sign of movement, but everything stayed still, too still. It felt like the world outside had frozen in time. The sound of the ocean crashing against the cliffs below seemed muted, as if the sea itself was holding its breath. Then, around midnight, I saw it. A silhouette. A ship. Far out on the horizon, just as it had been earlier. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. The ship hadn't appeared until late into the night before, but this was different. It was too close, just like before. The edges of the ship seemed sharp and dark against the backdrop of fog. No lights, no sound, just the eerie silhouette cutting through the mist. My hand shook as I reached for the binoculars. I brought them up to my eyes and tried to focus, but the fog blurred everything into a ghostly haze. The ship wasn't just a shape anymore. I could almost make out its outline, its form, a massive, hulking structure. It wasn't moving like any ship I'd ever seen. It was drifting, slow and deliberate, like a shadow that refused to leave. I rubbed my eyes. Was I imagining this? Could this really be happening? I shook my head. No, I wouldn't let my mind play tricks on me. It wasn't real. It was just the fog, a trick of the light, nothing more. But as the ship drew nearer, I could hear it. Something faint, something almost imperceptible. A low hum, almost like a whisper carried by the wind. But there was no wind. The fog had stilled the air. It was as if the world had been muted except for that hum. It was then that I remembered the rule again. The ship will come every night. Don't go near it. The words of the old keeper came back to me, clearer than ever. I swallowed hard. It wasn't just a story. He had meant it. I wasn't supposed to approach the ship no matter what. But curiosity clawed at me. I didn't understand what I was seeing. I didn't understand what was happening, but I needed to know. Something in me pushed me forward, a feeling that this was more than just a ship. There was something else here, something that couldn't be explained by ordinary means. The ship's shadow grew larger as it came closer to the cliffs. I stepped back from the window, my chest tight. I had to force myself to breathe. I couldn't let this curiosity get the best of me. I had a job to do. The light needed to stay on. The radio needed to be checked. I couldn't afford to be distracted. Not by something I didn't understand. Not by something I couldn't control. I glanced at the clock. It was nearly time for the scheduled check on the radio. My hands moved mechanically as I went through the motions, trying to keep my mind occupied. I reached for the radio, fiddling with the dials, trying to tune in, but I couldn't focus. My mind kept drifting back to the ship. Every time I thought I could shake it off, I saw its dark outline through the window, looming like a silent sentinel, watching me. I told myself I was just being curious, nothing more, but there was a gnawing feeling in my stomach, like I knew that something was coming, and it wasn't going to be as simple as a ship passing by. Then just like that, the hum stopped. The ship was gone. I froze. I stared into the night, blinking in confusion. How could it disappear so quickly? One moment, it had been there, looming ominously in the fog. The next, it was gone, as if swallowed by the darkness itself. I felt a wave of relief wash over me, but it was short-lived. A cold chill settled in my bones, and I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't over. That ship wasn't just gonna disappear. It would be back. It always came back. And I had a sinking feeling that the more I resisted the pull, the closer it would get. The more it would try to drag me in. I moved back to the window and looked out, just to make sure it hadn't come back. But the sea was empty. No ship, just the mist, and the sound of the waves. The fog had closed in thicker than before, but I knew it would come again. I didn't know why, I didn't know what it was, but I knew one thing for sure. The ship was real, and it was coming for me. The ship didn't show up the following night, at least not in the same way. I spent the next day trying to shake the unease from my mind. I went about my usual duties, maintaining the light, making sure the radio worked, checking the weather conditions, keeping the lighthouse in order. The routine felt like a lifeline, something that grounded me in a place that more and more felt like it was slipping out of my control. The fog never really lifted. It hung in the air, thick and oppressive, like a blanket that muffled everything. The sun never seemed to make its way through it, just a constant, dull gray sky that mirrored the bleakness I felt inside. I couldn't stop thinking about that ship, the way it had come so close the night before and how it had just disappeared without a trace. It wasn't normal. No ship would simply vanish like that. And if it was a ghost ship, if it really was some kind of curse, what did that mean for me? I told myself I was being paranoid. I had to be. I had to focus on my job and stop letting the strange atmosphere get to me. But something inside me said it wasn't over. I wasn't ready for what was coming. Around midnight, I felt a shift in the air. It was subtle at first, almost imperceptible, but it was there. A kind of tension that crawled across my skin, making every hair on my body stand on end. I looked out the window again, feeling the familiar pool of curiosity. I couldn't help it. Something about the way the night was unfolding felt wrong. Then I saw it. The ship was back. It appeared again on the horizon, just like the night before, moving slowly through the fog. This time, it wasn't as far out. It was closer. It was larger than I remembered. And the silence. There was no wind, no creaking of the ship's hull, no sound of any kind, except for the faint hum I thought I'd imagined the night before. But it was real this time, louder, almost like the ship itself was alive. It was a hum, a deep vibration that seemed to rattle my bones. It felt like the ship was drawing me in. I stood frozen by the window, my pulse quickening. I was scared, yes, but I was also drawn to it, as if some invisible force was urging me to go closer. I felt a strange pull in my chest, like I was supposed to board the ship to understand it. The feeling was overwhelming, almost impossible to ignore. But I remembered the rule the old keeper had drilled into my head. Don't board it. Never board it. But as I stared at it, I realized I didn't understand the rule anymore. What did it mean? Why was I supposed to stay away? Was it simply superstition, a warning from an old paranoid man, or was there something far darker at play here? My thoughts were interrupted by a strange movement. I looked closer. The ship's hull seemed to shift, and for a moment, I thought I saw something on the deck. Shadows, figures. But when I blinked, they were gone. Just like that. Vanished. Had I imagined it? I rubbed my eyes and took another look, but there was nothing. No movement. No lights, no crew. The ship was as it was, always. Still, silent, massive. A sharp breath caught in my throat. The feeling of being watched intensified. I felt the weight of it deep in my chest. It wasn't just a ship. It was something else. Something that wasn't supposed to exist. I backed away from the window, my pulse racing. My mind was spinning. This couldn't be real. I had to be imagining it. It was just the fog, the isolation. But as I turned around to walk away, I heard it again. A faint voice, barely audible over the sound of the waves. At first, I thought it was the wind. The wind played tricks on you out here. But no, it was a voice, soft and distant, but unmistakable. I couldn't make out the words, but I felt it in my bones. It was calling me. I wasn't supposed to hear it. I wasn't supposed to be a part of whatever this was. But I heard it, and it was impossible to ignore. I rushed to the radio, trying to tune in to any broadcast, any signal that could pull me away from this. Anything to distract me. The dial clicked and hissed, static crackling through the speakers, but there was nothing there. Just silence. The kind of silence that feels too loud, like it's pressing down on you. A silence that feels alive. I could feel the weight of it pressing against my chest, suffocating me. I turned back to the window, a heart in my throat, and the ship was closer. Far too close. I couldn't understand why it hadn't made any sound. Why hadn't I heard the engines, the creaking of the boat's framework, the sound of it cutting through the water? It didn't make sense. And then, the fog seemed to shift. The ship wasn't just moving anymore. It was heading straight for the lighthouse. Slowly, but surely. It was coming closer. Much closer. Too close. The hum was louder now. It was coming from the ship, vibrating in the air, wrapping around me like a weight. It was as if the ship was alive, a monstrous, eerie presence that was drawing nearer, with every passing second. I stepped back, my heart hammering in my chest. I was trembling now, my legs weak. I didn't know if it was fear or something else entirely that had me rooted to the spot. The ship was coming. And no matter how much I wanted to look away, no matter how much I wanted to turn off the light and pretend I hadn't seen it, I couldn't. It was there, watching me, waiting for something. I wasn't sure if I could resist its pull anymore. I took a deep breath. This wasn't just a ship, and I wasn't just a keeper anymore. I was part of this. I didn't know what the ship was or why it was here, but I had a sinking feeling that whatever was on board wasn't gonna let me leave. And the longer I stayed here, the more I understood. The ship had chosen me.
That's what struck me first when I saw it again the next night. The way it looked, the way it felt as it loomed out there in the fog, closer than ever before. The ship, which had once seemed like a dark silhouette against the mist, was now a hulking, rusted wreck. The paint was peeling, the edges of the hull scarred and battered as though it had weathered 1,000 storms. But there hadn't been any storms, not recently anyway. The ship was aging, quickly, and as the nights passed, it only seemed to grow worse. I hadn't thought about it much at first. The strange hum, the unsettling stillness, the eerie atmosphere, it all blurred together into something I couldn't fully comprehend. But when I looked at the ship now, with the rust creeping up its sides like some kind of slow-moving infection, I felt a cold knot in my stomach. The ship wasn't just wrong, it was deteriorating. It was decaying right before my eyes, as though time was speeding up for it. And it wasn't just the ship. The sea around it seemed different too. The waves were slower, heavier, like the entire ocean was holding its breath. I watched the ship through the window, my hands gripping the frame tighter than I intended. I knew, deep down, that I should be afraid. I was afraid. But at the same time, a strange compulsion tugged at me, something pulling me to that rusted hull, whispering that I needed to understand it. It felt urgent. The night was colder than usual, the fog thicker, clinging to the lighthouse like a living thing. The air felt charged with something I couldn't name, and the silence outside was almost unbearable. I should have been able to hear the waves crashing against the rocks below, the wind something. But there was nothing, just that low hum vibrating in the air like an unseen presence. As I watched, a chill ran through my bones. A shadow moved on the deck. A figure, barely visible through the fog, but unmistakable. I blinked, certain it was just a trick of the light, my mind playing games with me. But no, the figure was still there. I swallowed hard, my throat dry. This wasn't right. The ship was closer than it had been before, but the figure wasn't moving like a person should. It was too still, too unnatural, as if it wasn't quite human. The shape of it seemed wrong. The way it stood, unmoving, didn't make sense. I squinted, my heart pounding, trying to see more clearly. The figure was gone, just like that. Vanished. I felt my pulse race as I blinked rapidly, trying to convince myself I hadn't seen what I thought I saw. But the ship, it was still there, still drifting closer, its rusted body creeping through the fog like a slow-moving predator. I felt the chest tighten. I could feel it, deep in my bones. The ship was alive, and whatever it wasn't here by accident. That's when I heard it again. The whisper, soft, almost too soft to hear, but it wasn't coming from the ship this time. It was coming from inside the lighthouse. My blood went cold. I jerked my head toward the stairwell, my breath catching in my throat. The whispering grew louder, more distinct, echoing through the empty halls. I could almost hear it now, could almost make out the words. But they weren't words I recognized. They sounded like pleading. Desperate. I stepped away from the window, trying to steady my racing heart. There had to be a logical explanation for this.
The isolation was getting to me. The fog was playing tricks on my mind. The silence, that unnatural silence, was making me paranoid. That's all. But when I turned back to the window, the ship was closer. It was so close now, I could see the individual planks of the ship's deck warped and splintering. The rust had spread up the sides like veins in an old, rotting corpse. And there were no crew members, no movement. The ship seemed dead, yet still alive. I backed away from the window, my body tense, trying to ignore the sound of the whispers behind me. The air in the lighthouse was thick now, heavier than it had ever been. It felt like the very walls were closing in on me. I took a deep breath, fighting to stay calm. I couldn't let this place break me. I was here for a reason. I had to do my job, but I couldn't help the thought that kept running through my mind. What happened to the previous keeper? The rule, don't board the ship. But now, more than ever, I needed to understand what was going on. I had to know what was happening to the ship, to the sea, and to me. There was something wrong with this place, something far deeper than the rusted hull of a ghost ship. I glanced at the clock, my heart sinking when I saw how late it had gotten. It was nearly midnight. I knew the ship would come again soon. But this time, something was different. I didn't know what it was, but the air felt thick. There was a pressure, like something was waiting for me to do something, anything. And I felt a creeping dread in the pit of my stomach, something that told me if I didn't act soon, the consequences would be much worse. I looked out the window one more time, my breath catching as I saw it. The ship wasn't drifting anymore. It was heading straight for the lighthouse. I could feel the weight of the curse now. I was no longer just a keeper of the light. I was a part of this ship's story, and whether I liked it or not, I had been drawn into its dark fate. It was too late to turn back now.
It was hard to think clearly after that night. The ship was no longer just an anomaly or a distant fear. It was real. It was here. And I couldn't shake the feeling that it was getting closer every time. Each night it came, but now it seemed like there was something new, something more urgent about its arrival. I couldn't let go of the strange sense of dread that followed me around. The whispers had become louder, more frequent, and I couldn't ignore them anymore. Every time the fog settled, the whispers would creep in, soft, unintelligible sounds that seemed to slither into my thoughts. Sometimes they were voices, sometimes just a low hum, but they never stopped. And each time I heard them, I felt myself being pulled closer to the ship, closer to whatever dark force was behind it. I had to know what was going on. I had to understand. The rule of the old keeper had given me, don't board the ship, had stopped making sense. The more I thought about it, the less I understood why I was supposed to stay away. The ship seemed so alive, so aware of my presence. It didn't feel like just a ship. It felt like a trap that had been set for me long before I even took this job. There had to be more to it than that. I couldn't just live here alone with my growing fear, following some vague rule without understanding why. What was it about the ship? Why had it come every night without fail? And why did it seem so alive? I started digging through the records. The logs left by the previous keepers were sparse, cryptic, and incomplete at best. Most of them talked about routine maintenance, weather reports, and the usual stuff a lighthouse keeper would document. But here and there, between the lines, I found bits of information that made my blood run cold. One of the older logs mentioned the ship by name, something I hadn't heard before. It was referred to as the Silent Harbinger. That alone was enough to set my nerves on edge, but it was the rest of the entry that chilled me. The keeper had written about how the ship arrived every night, just like the others had warned me, but there was more. The Harbinger brings the dead, or what's left of them. What did that mean? The dead? I kept reading, hoping for more context, but the next line made my stomach churn. Never approach it. Never board it. Not for any reason. It's not just a ship. It's a gate, a way in and a way out. If you go aboard, you never leave. I froze. My mind raced. A gate? A way out? What was the keeper trying to say? I had to know. I had to understand what was happening to the ship and why it had become so personal. The ship seemed to know I was watching, as if it was waiting for me to make my move. It wasn't just a ship anymore. It was something else, something ancient, something far more sinister than I had ever imagined. The fog had thickened again by the time I decided to investigate further. The sea was restless tonight, and the wind carried an unnatural chill. I couldn't sit still. I couldn't ignore the urge to figure this out, to confront the mystery of the ship, no matter how terrified I was. I spent hours that night searching the tower and the lighthouse for anything else that could explain what was happening. I found more old journals from previous keepers, but each entry was more vague than the last. No one had ever been specific. There was only one thing they all seemed to agree on: don't board the ship. It was becoming clearer that whatever the ship was, it wasn't just a vessel. It was something else entirely. A trap. A place of transition. I wasn't sure if it was transporting souls or if it was something even worse, something that took its passengers and kept them. I kept coming back to the word gate. What if it wasn't just a metaphor? What if the ship was a literal gate, a gateway between the living and the dead? What if the previous keepers knew something I didn't? What if they had been trapped here, just like me, and their only escape had been to keep the light on year after year so the ship would never stop coming? And then it hit me. The ship didn't just come to collect, it came to feed. The whispers, the hum, the sense of something waiting. It wasn't just some eerie ship, it was something ancient, cursed, and hungry. And now, it had found me. The more I thought about it, the more certain I became. I wasn't just a lighthouse keeper anymore. I was part of this dark history. The ship wasn't just a thing that arrived at night. It was a force that had been calling me here all along. But the more I realized this, the more I wanted to run, to leave the lighthouse, to get as far away as I could. But there was nowhere to go. The ship had come for me, and it wouldn't stop. I could feel it in my bones. It knew I was here. It knew I had uncovered its secrets. I couldn't just sit in the tower and wait for it to come. I had to do something. Anything. I had to break free of this place, of the rule of the ship. But as the hours passed, the fog crept in thicker, and the sea grew more restless. I knew that when the ship came again, it wouldn't just be watching me from a distance. It would be waiting for me. The next night would be different. It had to be. But what would happen when I finally decided to confront it? I didn't know, but I was about to find out.
That night, I couldn't ignore the pull any longer. The ship was going to come again, and this time I couldn't just hide in the lighthouse, pretending I wasn't drawn to it. The whispers had been getting louder, the hum more intense. I knew I had to face whatever it was head on, but deep down, a small voice, one I almost ignored, told me I wasn't ready. I could feel the pressure mounting in the pit of my stomach. I didn't know if I could resist it anymore. It was like the ship knew I was thinking about it, and with each passing minute it was becoming harder to deny the pull. The rules, the warnings, none of that mattered anymore. It was time to confront it. The fog had thickened even more as the night fell. There was no moon, no stars, just an endless blanket of gray swallowing everything in its path. It felt suffocating, the air so thick it seemed to press against me. And then, like clockwork, I saw it. The ship. Just as it had been before, but this time, it was different. It was closer, so much closer. The hum in the air had grown unbearable, and the sense of something alive in the fog was stronger than ever. There was no denying it anymore. I could feel it in my bones. I stood frozen at the window, my hands trembling as I gripped the sill. The ship wasn't just approaching the lighthouse, it was heading straight for it. I had to move. I couldn't just stand there, watching as it drew nearer. I turned on my heel and rushed down the stairs, out of the tower. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst. Every part of me screamed to turn around, to climb back into the safety of the tower and forget what I was about to do. But I didn't stop. I couldn't. I stepped out onto the rocky platform beneath the lighthouse. The air was heavy, thick with fog, and I could barely see more than a few feet in front of me. The ocean crashed against the rocks below, but it felt muffled, distant, like the ocean itself was holding its breath. Everything around me was waiting. Then, there it was. The ship. I could make out its outline now, its enormous rusted body looming in the fog, casting an unnatural shadow across the water. The hum was almost deafening now. It wasn't just coming from the ship, it was coming from the sea, from the air, from everywhere. I don't know why I stepped forward. Maybe I was desperate to understand, or maybe it was just the weight of the ship, the pull, the undeniable force that dragged me to it. The ship seemed to call to me, and against every instinct, every warning, I found myself walking toward the edge of the rocks, moving toward it. It felt wrong. The further I went, the more the air seemed to thicken. The silence wrapped itself around me, heavier than ever. But I couldn't stop. Something was driving me forward. As I got closer to the ship, the fog parted briefly, and I saw it more clearly. The ship wasn't just rusty, it was decaying. It looked like it had been abandoned for centuries, its wood rotting, the sails tattered and torn. The deck was empty. No crew, no movement, just silence. Yet there was something about it that felt alive. There was a pulse, like the ship itself was breathing, waiting for something. I should have turned around. I should have gone back to the lighthouse, locked the door, and never come near this thing again. But I couldn't. I reached the dock, the one that led onto the ship, and stopped. The door to the ship's entry was wide open, beckoning me inside. I stood at the threshold, looking into the dark, empty ship. The whispers were louder now, almost deafening, swirling around my head like 1,000 voices. It wasn't just one voice anymore. It was a chorus, a group of voices that felt wrong, distorted, like they were trying to speak but couldn't find the words. I stepped onto the ship. The moment my foot hit the deck, the world seemed to shift. The air grew colder, the fog thicker. I could feel something closing in on me, something darker, more intense than anything I had ever known. The ship creaked beneath my feet, groaning as if it were coming to life. I took a few steps forward, my heart racing, my body trembling. The whispers were louder now, almost frantic, echoing through the empty halls of the ship. It was as if the ship was aware of my presence. It was watching me. The sense of being surrounded, of being trapped, grew stronger. And then, I saw them. The remnants of passengers. Not people, but signs of them. Empty seats, overturned tables, broken glass. The ship was dead, but these remnants, these traces told a different story. The whispers swirled around me, faster now, and I could almost hear them clearly. The voices weren't just whispers anymore. They were pleas. Join us. Stay with us. I shivered, every inch of my skin screaming at me to turn around, to leave, but I couldn't. I was paralyzed. The ship was pulling me in, wrapping around me, suffocating me with its presence. And then, from somewhere deeper within the ship, I heard a creak, slow, deliberate, like something moving toward me. I turned. There, standing at the far end of the hall, was a figure. It was tall, unnaturally so, shrouded in darkness, its outline indistinct. The figure didn't move, didn't speak, but I could feel its eyes on me. And in that moment, I understood. The ship wasn't just abandoned. It was waiting for me. It had always been waiting for someone like me, someone who couldn't resist the pull, someone who would step aboard despite the warnings. And now, it had found me. I wanted to run, I wanted to scream, to escape, but my legs wouldn't move. The whispers were overwhelming now, and I felt the presence of the figure looming closer. Stay! Stay!
The figure at the far end of the ship didn't move, but I could feel it getting closer with every heartbeat. The silence was deafening now, the air thick with something I couldn't name. Every instinct in my body screamed for me to leave, but my legs felt like they were made of stone, refusing to obey. It was like the ship had a hold on me, rooting me in place, as though the very wood beneath my feet had become part of my soul. I was trapped. The whispers hadn't stopped, though. If anything, they were growing louder, more insistent. The voices now felt like they were inside my head, crawling through my thoughts like 1,000 tiny insects. I couldn't escape them. I couldn't block them out. They were coming from all around me, from the ship itself, from the shadows in the corners, from the walls that groaned as if they were alive. "Stay! You belong here," the voices murmured over and over again. "You have to stay. You can't leave. Stay with us." I had to know. I had to understand. I couldn't just stand there, paralyzed by the whispers. I had to know what this ship was, what had happened to the previous keepers, what it wanted. I forced my legs to move, each step heavy and reluctant. I had to find answers. I stumbled down a dark hallway, the shadows pressing in around me, the ship's silence broken only by the constant hum vibrating in the air. The whispers were clearer now, but still I couldn't understand them. The words felt fragmented, twisted. The ship seemed to absorb them, echoing them back in distorted ways. I came to a door. It was different from the others. It wasn't like the others I'd passed, which were locked or bolted shut. This door was half open, like it had been waiting for me to enter. I stepped inside. What I saw made my blood run cold. The room was full of old journals, crumpled papers, and faded photographs. It looked like the remains of a keeper's quarters, but it was clear the room hadn't been touched in years. Dust covered everything, but there were signs of hurried movement, papers scattered across the floor, journals half open, pages torn, and then, in the center of it all, an old chest, covered in rust and grime, like it had been sitting there untouched for centuries. I walked toward it, slowly, drawn in by some force I couldn't understand. The whispers were now muffled, but still there, like a dull roar in the back of my mind. I reached for the chest, my hand trembling. I shouldn't have opened it. Part of me knew I shouldn't have, but I had to know. I had to see what was inside. I pulled the lid open. Inside, there was a single object, an old, weathered journal. It looked almost ancient, the pages yellowed with age, the leather binding cracked and torn. The cover was so worn I could barely make out the writing on it. But it wasn't the title that grabbed my attention. It was the name written inside, scrawled in messy handwriting. John Masters. The previous keeper, the one who had warned me about the ship. I flipped through the pages, my fingers trembling as I read through the entries. The first few pages were mundane enough, weather reports, duties, routine lighthouse maintenance. But then the tone changed. The entries became more frantic, desperate, like someone who was slowly losing their mind. Night after night, it comes. The ship, the silent harbinger, I can hear the voices too. They're calling me. I can't leave. It's getting closer. The fog never lifts. It feels like it's alive, wrapping around the lighthouse, dragging me in. I've been here for years. I think I'm trapped. The ship. I don't know if it's real, but it feels real. It's alive. It knows me, and I can't stop it. The handwriting was messier now, harder to read. The words bled together in some places like the ink had been smeared by tears. The whispers have stopped, but now I hear them in the walls, in the wood, in the air. The ship has been here longer than I thought. It's not just a ship. It's a curse. It comes for us. It's feeding on us. It's not just taking us. It's consuming us. I felt a cold sweat form on my brow as I read the final entry. I tried to leave. I tried to escape, but I can't. The ship won't let me, and it never stops. It will never stop. The last few pages were torn, ripped away, as though someone had tried to destroy them. But the truth was clear. The ship wasn't just a ship. It wasn't just some ghostly vessel passing through the fog. It was alive, a cursed thing, a dark force, something that fed on the souls of those who found themselves trapped in its grip. I couldn't breathe. My heart was racing, and my legs felt like they were going to give out beneath me. The whispers were deafening now, as though the ship itself had begun to speak to me directly. I could feel it crawling under my skin, the force pressing against my chest, making it hard to breathe. I had made a terrible mistake. I had come aboard, and now I understood what it wanted. It wanted me. I couldn't escape. I knew that now. There was no running. The ship had claimed me the moment I stepped aboard. I was part of its curse now, just another lost soul trapped in its endless cycle. I slammed the journal shut, but the feeling didn't leave. The whispers didn't stop. They only grew louder, more insistent. "Stay with us," the voices murmured like a chorus of the damned, and just as I was about to make a run for it, to find the nearest way off the ship, I felt something shift in the air. The figure I had seen earlier, the one standing in the shadows, was closer now. Too close. It was standing right in front of me. It wasn't human. It wasn't even alive. It was something worse.
I froze. My breath caught in my throat as I stared at the figure. It wasn't just a shadow. It was solid. Its form was tall, twisted, and vaguely humanoid, but there was nothing human about it. The shape seemed to shift with the fog around it, stretching and warping as though it were part of the ship itself. The edges of its body blurred, flickering like a flame that couldn't decide whether it wanted to burn or be extinguished. It didn't move, but I felt it watching me. It wasn't just staring, it was waiting. My heart pounded in my chest, my legs refusing to move. The whispers were deafening now, a cacophony of desperate voices begging me to stay, to join them. I shook my head, trying to block them out, but they were relentless. I had to leave. I had to get away. I turned, desperate to escape, but the air around me thickened. The fog seemed to close in, squeezing tighter, wrapping itself around my body like chains. I stumbled back, my hands reaching out for something, anything to steady myself, but there was nothing. The ship's hull stretched on, twisting in ways they shouldn't have, looping back on themselves like an endless maze. The walls themselves seemed to shift, pulling me deeper into their grasp. I turned back, looking toward the door I had just entered, but when I reached it, I found the hallway had changed. The path I had walked down earlier was gone, replaced with a dark, oppressive corridor that seemed to stretch into infinity. The door that had been wide open to the outside world was now sealed shut, as if it had never been there at all. No! 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 I scrambled at the door, pulling at the handle, but it wouldn't budge.
The sound of my breathing was the only thing I could hear now, heavy and ragged. My palms were slick with sweat. Panic clawed at my chest as I realized what was happening. The ship had taken control. It wasn't just the fog. It wasn't just the whispers. The ship had changed the space around me. The walls, the corridors, everything was warping, twisting. I was stuck. No matter which way I turned, no matter how far I ran, the ship was pulling me in deeper. There was no escape. I spun around in a frenzy, desperate to find another way out. But the ship was closing in on me. The corridors were getting narrower, the walls pressing in, as though the very ship itself was alive, hungry for something, hungry for me. I could feel its presence all around me, its darkness seeping into my thoughts, making everything feel distorted. The air was thick, suffocating. The whispers had turned into words, clear and sharp now, reverberating through the very walls. "Join us," they called. "You belong here." I couldn't breathe. The walls felt like they were closing in on me, the pressure mounting with every second. The ship wasn't just alive, it was alive in a way I couldn't understand, feeding off something deep inside me. It knew my fears, my doubts. It had been waiting for me all along. I turned once more, my mind racing, my heart hammering in my chest. I had to escape. There had to be a way out. Then I saw it. At the end of the hallway, just past where the walls began to blur, there was a door. It looked like the others, but something about it was different. It was new, untouched by time or rot. There was light spilling from beneath the crack in the door, warm and inviting. I rushed toward it, my legs barely able to keep up with the frantic pace of my thoughts. I reached for the handle and twisted it with all my strength, praying for some way to break free. But the door wouldn't open. It was locked. I shoved against it, banging my fists against the wood. "Let me out!" I screamed, my voice breaking. "Please, please, let me out!" But there was no answer. The ship didn't respond. I felt the weight of it, the weight of the ship's presence bearing down on me. The whispers grew louder, surrounding me, drowning me in their desperation. "Join us, come to us, never leave." I collapsed against the door, my body shaking with exhaustion, with fear. I didn't know how much longer I could keep this up. I didn't know how much longer I could survive inside the ship with its constant hum, its suffocating grip. I glanced around, trying to make sense of the distorted space, but it was like trying to find my way out of a nightmare. The walls had changed again. The hallway that had once seemed like an escape was now a maze of corridors that looped back on themselves. The ship wasn't just trapping me physically, it was bending time and space, disorienting me with its endless twists and turns. There was no escape. The ship was alive, and it was feeding on my fear. Every time I tried to run, it pulled me back in, suffocating me with its presence. The ship wasn't just a place. It was a prison, a trap for the lost, a way for it to claim you, to keep you for as long as it wanted. The cursed thing had been pulling people into its depths for centuries, and now it had me. I slid to the floor, my back pressed against the cold wood of the door. I couldn't move anymore. I couldn't fight it. The whispers continued, louder now, closer. I could hear them in my ears, in my mind. "Stay with us. Forever." It was then that I realized the truth. There was no way out. Not for me. Not for anyone who had ever stepped on this ship. The silent harbinger didn't just trap you physically. It consumed you, body and soul. And now I was part of it. The door in front of me creaked open. I couldn't run anymore. I was already gone.
The door creaked open, but I didn't step through it. I couldn't. The realization that I was trapped had settled over me like a dark cloud, suffocating any will I had left to fight. My limbs felt like lead, too heavy to move, too exhausted to try. The ship had claimed me. There was no escape.
But somehow, despite the overwhelming despair, I was drawn to the light coming from the room beyond the door. For the first time since stepping onto this cursed ship, I felt a strange pull, not to run, not to escape, but to understand. I had to know the full truth. The room was bathed in a dim amber glow. As I stepped through the door, the sight that greeted me was not what I expected. It wasn't a cold, forgotten room like the others I'd passed through. This room, unlike anything else I'd encountered on the ship, felt familiar in a way. It felt like I was home. The walls were lined with old nautical charts, yellowed with age, covered in dust. There was a table at the center, cluttered with weathered papers, photographs, and a few open journals. And then, on the far wall, the thing that caught my attention, the lighthouse. Not the lighthouse I had come from, but a model of it, perfectly built, down to the smallest details. The lamp, the structure, even the rocks around it. It was a replica, but more than that, it felt wrong. It looked like the lighthouse, but there was something about the way it stood there, unsettling, as if it had been built with the intention of trapping something inside. I moved closer, my hand trembling as I reached for the model. My fingers brushed against the smooth wood, but something strange happened the moment I touched it. A wave of cold washed over me, and for a split second, I could feel the lighthouse, the real one, beneath me. The walls shifted, and I could hear the sound of the ocean crashing against the rocks below. It was as though the ship had pulled the lighthouse here, brought it into this space, and I had become part of both. And then it hit me. The ship, the lighthouse, they were connected. I backed away from the model, my mind spinning. How? How could the ship be connected to the lighthouse? How could these two things, so far apart, be tied together? I picked up a journal from the table, my hand shaking. The pages were filled with strange writings, not like anything I'd seen in the logs of the previous keepers. These pages were written in a hurried, almost panicked scrawl. The ink was smeared in places, as though the writer had been rushing, desperate to get the words down before something stopped them. As I flipped through the pages, the truth began to emerge, slowly, painfully. The keeper who had written these entries had learned something the others hadn't. He had learned that the lighthouse wasn't just a beacon, it was a guard for the ship. The ship comes every night, the last entry read. But it's not just a ship, it's a way to connect the two worlds. The lighthouse, it guides the souls in. It's been calling them, calling me for years. The ship is just the vessel. The real horror lies beneath. If I don't keep the light on, if I don't stay, the ship will come and the souls will be lost. I am bound to it. We all are. The lighthouse, the ship, they are two parts of the same curse. I felt my breath catch in my throat. The keeper had been trapped, just like I was. And worse yet, the ship wasn't the end of it. The lighthouse was tied to the ship in a way I couldn't even begin to comprehend. This wasn't just a curse on the ship. It wasn't just the ship that had brought me here. It was the lighthouse. The ship needed the lighthouse, and the lighthouse needed the ship. Together, they had been forming an unbreakable bond, a cycle that had been going on for who knows how long. It wasn't just the keeper's curse, it was the lighthouse's.
and I had unknowingly stepped right into it. The ship wasn't a curse in itself, it was the delivery of the curse, the way in which the souls of those who had become part of it were collected. The lighthouse was the trap. The light, the very thing I had thought was my salvation, was the key to keeping the cycle going. And if I left, if I stopped keeping the light on, the ship would come and it would take everything with it. I stumbled back, my vision swimming. I had seen the truth, but it was too much to bear. I wasn't just trapped on this ship, I was part of it. The lighthouse had been calling me all along. It had brought me here just as it had brought every keeper before me. The ship and the lighthouse, they were linked. Together, they had been keeping the darkness at bay. But now, as the truth sank in, I realized that darkness was rising. It was too late to leave. I was already bound to it. And as the ship continued to hum, continuing to call me, I knew that the curse wasn't just something I would have to live with. It was something I would have to carry forever. I felt the weight of the lighthouse's secret on my shoulders, crushing me. There was no way out now. The cycle had begun again, and I was already a part of it. The whispers began again, louder now, clearer, more insistent. Stay with us, forever. The ship was calling me, but now I understood. It wasn't just the ship that needed me. The lighthouse did too. I was already one of them, and I could never leave.
The air in the ship had become suffocating. The fog, thick and alive, clung to everything like an invasive force, spreading into my lungs, chilling me to the bone. I could feel the pressure building in my chest, as if the very weight of the ship and the lighthouse were closing in on me, pushing me deeper into the darkness. The whispers never stopped now, louder than before, echoing in my mind, in my ears, in the walls around me. Stay with us. Never leave. The ship was calling me. It wasn't just a pull anymore. It was a compulsion, a force beyond anything I could resist. My legs moved on their own, dragging me through the ship's narrow corridors. I tried to stop, tried to fight the feeling, but it was useless. The ship had me, and now there was no escaping its grasp. The walls seemed to pulse with each step I took, the floors creaking beneath me as though the ship was alive, breathing, waiting for me to succumb. I had seen the truth, understood the secret, but it didn't make it any easier to face. I could feel the weight of it pressing down on me, smothering me. I had thought I could leave. I had thought maybe I could escape, that this was just a bad dream, a nightmare I could wake up from. But the ship had been waiting for me. It had been calling me, pulling me in, and now there was no turning back. I came to the deck, and the ship was closer to the lighthouse now. I could see it clearly through the fog. The ship was massive, its hull towering above me, its dark, rusted surface gleaming in the dim light. It wasn't just a ship. It was a gateway, a bridge between the living and the dead, and I was standing in the middle of it. I could feel the ship's presence, its ancient power thrumming beneath my feet. The whispers grew louder, swirling around me like a cyclone. I could feel them all now, the souls, the lost ones who had been taken by the ship before me. They were all around me, trapped in the ship's dark embrace, unable to escape, and I knew with absolute certainty that I would never leave either, not now, not ever. The hum was deafening now, vibrating through the ship's very bones. My head ached, my heart pounding painfully in my chest as I stumbled forward, drawn by some invisible force. The ship's pull was stronger than anything I had ever felt before. It was like it was reaching into my very soul, wrapping itself around my mind, suffocating me. Come to us, the voices whispered. You belong with us. I wanted to scream, to fight, but I couldn't. I was already lost. The ship creaked and groaned, the sound of the wood bending and shifting filling the air like a funeral dirge. The ship was alive in a way that made everything feel wrong. I could feel it now, in my bones. The ship was feeding, drawing power from the souls it had taken before me, growing stronger with each one. And now it was feeding on me too. I felt myself being pulled forward, towards the edge of the deck, the lighthouse looming ahead in the distance. It felt like a terrible finality, like the inevitable end of the cycle. The ship and the lighthouse, they were one. I had thought I was running away from my past when I took this job, but I hadn't known. I hadn't known that the past was always going to find me. It was here, in the fog, in the ship. It had been waiting for me all along. I stepped forward, my body moving on its own, my feet carrying me closer to the edge. The fog seemed to part before me, and I could see it clearly now. The lighthouse, the real lighthouse, standing tall and unyielding against the fog. The beacon that had drawn me here in the first place. But there was no way out. I wasn't meant to leave. I had never been meant to leave. The ship was waiting. The lighthouse was waiting. The curse was waiting. And as I stood at the edge of the deck, the fog curling around me like tendrils of smoke, I felt the inevitable truth settle over me like a cold shroud. I had come full circle. The final piece had clicked into place, and I understood now that there was no escape. The ship and the lighthouse had always been tied together, and they had claimed me, just as they had claimed the others before me. There was no running from this. There was no way out of the cycle. I turned to face the ship, its enormous form looming in front of me, its dark, rusted hull reaching towards the sky. I could feel its presence all around me, wrapping itself around my mind, suffocating me, drawing me in. And then, with one last desperate breath, I stepped off the edge of the ship. The fall wasn't long. The crash of the water below came quickly, and I felt the cold, dark depths of the ocean swallow me whole. But as I sank deeper and deeper, the whispers didn't stop. They only grew louder. You belong to us. You will always belong to us. The coldness of the water surrounded me, the weight of it pressing against me, but I wasn't fighting it anymore. There was no reason to fight. I was already lost. The ship, the lighthouse, they were one, and now I was part of them, forever. I closed my eyes, sinking into the darkness, and for the first time since I arrived, I felt the weight lift. I was free. But then, the whispers began again, clearer this time. The ship will come every night. Don't board it. And I realized with a sudden, gut-wrenching certainty that this cycle would never end. Every night, the ship would return, and every night, it would find a new keeper, just like it found me. And I would be waiting for them, just as it had waited for me. And they would never escape either. The lighthouse would always call, and the ship would always come. I opened my eyes, but everything was dark. The suffocating blackness of the sea had swallowed me whole, pulling me down into its cold depths. My lungs burned, gasping for air that wasn't there. The whispers, they didn't stop. Even under the weight of the ocean, the voices were still with me, surrounding me, crawling under my skin. The ship had claimed me. The lighthouse had claimed me. And now, there was no escape. But as the cold water pressed in on all sides, a terrible realization washed over me. I was still there. I was still in the ship. I was still there with the lighthouse. I wasn't drowning. I wasn't dead. But I wasn't alive either. I was somewhere in between, trapped. The ship had always been a place of transition, a bridge between worlds, between life and death, between the living and the lost. And now, I was just another lost soul, a part of the ship, part of the curse that never ended. I tried to scream, but my mouth filled with water. The coldness of the sea wasn't what terrified me. No, What terrified me was the truth I had come to understand in that last terrible moment. The cycle was endless. It would never stop. I couldn't leave. There was no escape. The ship's hum was louder now, shaking through me. I could feel it vibrating in my bones. It was like the ship was alive in a way that made no sense, alive with the souls of everyone it had ever claimed. The curse of the ship was never ending. It had already claimed so many before me, and now it was claiming me. I was one of them. I was just another lost soul wandering the corridors of the ship, lost in the fog. But something inside me snapped, a deep, visceral feeling, a flicker of resistance. No, this couldn't be it. I wasn't just another soul in the dark. I wasn't going to be swallowed by the ship's hunger. The ocean was cold, but I pushed through it. I struggled against the water, against the weight of the curse, against the oppressive darkness that threatened to pull me under. The ship's hum continued, vibrating through the air like a pulse, and I could feel it in my chest. It was calling me. It always would. But I had to fight back. I had to get out. But the harder I fought, the more it became clear. There was no fighting it. I had been marked, just like the keeper before me, just like the others who had come before him. There was no running, there was no escaping. No matter how far I swam, no matter how hard I tried to resist, the cycle was set. And now, I would play my part, just as they all had. The ship's pull was too strong. I didn't know how long I struggled in the water, how long I fought against the cold, against the tide that pulled me deeper. Time had lost all meaning. My limbs felt numb, my body felt like it was being dragged by invisible hands. But then, in the deepest part of the ocean, when I thought I couldn't hold on any longer, I felt it. The faintest shift in the air. A whisper. It wasn't the usual whisper, the voices, the lost souls. It was something else, something more personal. It was a call, and I knew that call. The lighthouse, the ship, it was calling me back. I fought against it with every ounce of strength I had left. I kicked my legs, thrashing through the water, pushing myself upward toward the surface. I couldn't go back. I couldn't become part of the curse. I couldn't let the ship have me. Not yet. But as the closer I got to the surface, the more I realized the pull was growing stronger. It wasn't a force I could fight. It was inevitable. The ship, the lighthouse, they were waiting for me. I broke through the surface of the water, gasping for air, choking on the salt. But the air didn't feel real. The sky didn't feel real. The fog clung to me like a cloak, pressing in on me, as though it had never really gone away. The world around me was distorted, blurry, as though I wasn't quite there anymore. I was still in the ship, still part of the curse. And just like that, I understood. The ship and the lighthouse were not just places, they were realms, and I was trapped between them, unable to escape. I would never leave. I felt the cold water rising around me again. I felt the fog, the whispers, closing in once more. There was no escape. The ship, the lighthouse, the cycle would continue. And as I was pulled back into the darkness, the last thing I heard was the voice that had haunted me from the very beginning. The ship will come every night. Don't board it. But it was too late. I had boarded. And now, there was no leaving. If you've made it this far, then you know the truth. There's a place out there, hidden in the fog, where the ship waits.
And the lighthouse? It's not just a beacon. It's a warning. Every night, the ship returns, and every night, someone new is chosen. Will you be next? Or will you just be another lost soul wandering in the fog? Remember, the ship will come every night. And if you ever hear it calling, don't ignore it, because the ship is always waiting for the next keeper. And once you're chosen, there's no escape. If you enjoyed my story, stay for the next one. And remember, there's always something watching from the sea.